Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy and it's Wednesday, the 25th of September. I'm joined this evening by Maureen Watt, the retired SNP MSP and now brought back out of retirement President of the SNP. Maureen, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Brian. It's a while since we've been together, so nice to see you again.
Yeah, it has been. Thank you. We'll start with a Ukraine update. Today is the 945th day of the war in Ukraine. An official on Trump's campaign said the Republican nominee will not meet this week with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky while he is in the US. No meeting has been scheduled between the two, the official told the Associated Press. Donald Trump said the US needs to get out of the war in Ukraine and that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had no plan to do so. President Biden said Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine had failed as he urged the UN to keep supporting Kyiv until victory. He said the war had led to a strategic reordering that strengthened NATO and brought two new countries, Finland and Sweden, into the Security Pact. The US will send Ukraine an undisclosed number of medium-range cluster bombs and an array of rockets, artillery and armoured vehicles in military aid package totalling about $375 million, US officials said on Tuesday. The latest package of weapons provided through Presidential Drawdown Authority is one of the largest approved recently and will take stocks from Pentagon shelves to deliver the weapons more quickly to Ukraine. Including this latest package, the US has provided more than $56.2 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since Russia invaded. It comes as nearly $6 billion in funding for aid to Ukraine could expire at the end of the month unless Congress acts to extend the Pentagon's authority to send weapons from its stockpile to Kyiv. The US will find a way before the end of Biden's term in January to make use of the remaining aid, a senior State Department official said on Tuesday. In a forceful speech to the UN Security Council, President Zelensky called on a broad alliance of nations to force Russia into peace, saying that Vladimir Putin had violated the foundations of the United Nations and that the war can't be conquered by talks alone. Zelensky accused Moscow of committing international crimes by targeting Ukrainian civilians and energy infrastructure and claimed he had proof that Putin is plotting to target 3 Ukrainian nuclear power plants to further degrade the country's energy grid. Zelensky said his victory plan is not about negotiating with Russia, but finding a way of ending the conflict diplomatically. The head of the presidential office, Andriy Yermak, confirmed that an invitation to join NATO is part of Ukraine's so-called victory plan, details of which have not been delivered yet by Zelensky, who is due to present it to Biden this week. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva advocated for a plan for talks between Russia and Ukraine to end the conflict, a proposal already rejected by Ukraine's president. Chinese-Brazilian proposal, which was made public in May, calls for de-escalating the situation and the resumption of direct dialogue without requiring Russia to pull back. Russian strikes on a residential quarter of Ukraine's northeastern city of Kharkiv killed 3 civilians and wounded more than 30 on Tuesday afternoon, Ukrainian officials said. Russian lawmakers approved new measures to facilitate the army's ability to recruit suspected criminals for its war in Ukraine. Moscow has used prisoners extensively throughout its 2.5-year campaign. Maureen, quite a lengthy update. There's a lot of references to Trump and Biden and America. I guess is that because the UN assembly is on at the moment?
Yes, it's good that Zelensky is at the UN so that he can speak to as many countries as possible in order to get their support and aid packages. I'm not sure the details of this victory plan that he talks about, but clearly diplomatic negotiation part of that, although we're nowhere near the two parties coming together in a room to talk, so it's going to have to be third-party negotiation, and I don't think it's clear who's going to do that. Putin, as you said, is calling up more recruits, not volunteers, but and he's not in any way, shape, or form looking as if he's pulling back at all. In fact, I would have said the opposite. I saw pictures in one newspaper of a beautiful looking church that had been destroyed in Ukraine by a Russian bomb. I think, as I say, Russia are still very much belligerent and targeting bombs. Whether, talking about destroying nuclear plants is just a threat or would actually occur is difficult at this stage to know, but it's still a rather bleak outlook, is it not?
Thank you, Maureen. And now we move on to the situation in Israel and Gaza. At least 41,467 Palestinians have been killed and 95,921 wounded in Gaza since the 7th, since the 7th of October, according to the Gaza Health Authority. Nearly 30 Palestinians were killed in Israeli airstrikes in Nuseirat and Burej refugee camps in central Gaza on Tuesday, according to hospital officials. A total of 29 Palestinians, including 14 children and 6 women, died as a result of the Israeli strikes on Tuesday. At least 569 people were killed from 2 days of Israeli airstrikes targeting Hezbollah, according to the latest death toll by Lebanese health authorities. Death toll includes 50 children and 94 women. 2 staff members of the UN's refugee agency, the UNHCR, were among the 558 people killed in Lebanon on Monday, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, said. Thousands of Lebanese people fled the continuing bombing in the country's south on Tuesday, as Israel said it was conducting extensive strikes on Hezbollah targets, including on the southern suburbs of Beirut, for the second day in a row and third time this week. Israel carried out an airstrike in Jaya, a seaside town 20 kilometres south of Beirut, late Tuesday night. Israel's military said an attack in Dahi, Hezbollah's stronghold in Beirut, on Tuesday had killed Ibrahim Mohammed Kubaisi, also known as Abu Isa, the commander of Hezbollah's rocket and missile division. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to maintain the offensive against Hezbollah and said the group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was leading Lebanon to the edge of the abyss. Israel Defense Forces, the IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari, said Israel is striving for its current military campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon to be as short as possible, but he added that Israel is also prepared for the operation to take time. Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Hezbollah has suffered extremely severe blows and Israel has more strikes ready. Hezbollah said it had targeted several Israeli military targets, including an explosives factory about 35 miles into Israel and the Megiddo airfield near the town of Afula, which it attacked 3 separate times. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has told world leaders that Lebanon is on the brink of becoming a second Gaza, adding the crisis has become a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the whole region down. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell described the escalating conflict between Israel and Hezbollah as almost a full-fledged war. President Biden addressed the risk of a potential full-scale war in Lebanon during an address to the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday. He said that a full-scale war is not in anyone's interest, adding, even though the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. There are 700 troops to Cyprus. Forgive me. 700 troops to Cyprus are ready for an emergency evacuation of UK citizens from Lebanon. Sir Keir Starmer, I'm wondering if that's actually the next story. Maureen, was there anything there that you would like to highlight from the update from Israel and Gaza?
Well, I think I mean, I'm not sure that anybody thought that war with Lebanon or an invasion of Lebanon was on the cards until that terrible attack through pagers of Hezbollah members. I thought that was absolutely dreadful, absolutely appalling. And I hadn't reckoned, I don't know if others had, that Israel would turn its attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon at all. But it seems that Netanyahu is just completely determined to create mayhem around him and in the countries around him. Whether Israel will come out best and on top of this, I would doubt. And I think it's absolutely awful for the people of Lebanon to be in this situation now. I mean, I remember when Lebanon was a go-to place as a tourist destination where you could ski in the morning and swim in the Mediterranean in the afternoon. And it's heartbreaking to see how this country has fallen into virtually a kind of ungoverned state. And I think it's wise that British nationals are asked to get out. And it's perhaps fortunate that Cyprus is so close to Lebanon. But whether we're going to see a full-scale war in Lebanon as we have in Gaza is yet to be determined. And I think Biden is absolutely right to call for people to move back from the brink and negotiate rather than another full-scale war like we've seen in Gaza is just unimaginable.
Thank you, Maureen. So the next item is the Labour conference. The Labour leadership has lost a highly anticipated motion at the party's conference for cuts to winter fuel payments to be reversed. The defeat is a blow to Sir Keir Starmer and his ministers. The vote was carried by a show of hands in a noisy conference hall, with members cheering as it was announced that the Labour leadership had lost the motion. Sharon Graham, the General Secretary of Unite, opened the debate, criticising Starmer for removing the allowance while leaving the super-rich untouched. Speaking to loud applause, she told delegates, "Our public services and British industry need investment now. It's no good having sympathy for workers at Grangemouth losing their jobs. They don't need pity. They need Labour to step up to the plate and not allow a billionaire who buys a football club as a hobby to throw these workers on the scrap heap." She added, "We are the sixth richest economy in the world. We have the money. Britain needs investment, not austerity Mark II. We won't get any gold badge for shaving peanuts off our debt." And she added, "It's the wrong decision and it needs to be reversed." Stephen Flynn MP, the SNP's Westminster leader, called for Keir Starmer to listen to voters, admit he got it wrong, and U-turn on Labour's government's damaging cuts to the winter fuel payment. I wonder, Maureen, Richard Burgon, the Labour MP for Leeds East, was suspended from the party for voting against the government's plans to keep the two-child benefit cap, and said Starmer should respect the conference's vote on the winter fuel payment. Do you think Starmer will take Burgon's advice?
No, I don't. I think they've got themselves too far down the road now of with scrapping the winter fuel payment. That would be a terrible climb down for the new government if they did reverse it. Although I think some humility and realising that the whole country is against what they've done is something that they should recognise and look for those savings elsewhere. Everything to me seems to hinge on what will be said in the budget at the end of October. It's going to be highly anticipated, and I think how the new Labour government goes forward will be defined by what is in this budget. I mean, a lot at the Labour Party conference was pretty bland and nondescript in terms of what precisely they're going to do, and where, in my view, and what I heard, and it's not all of the conference, a lot of what they had said they were going to do, which wasn't much, I thought, we're already doing that in Scotland. We're already doing that in Scotland. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of money is put behind things like breakfast clubs for school children and things like that, and what consequentials we can expect to see from Westminster, or will departments all be asked to find the money to provide these things from existing resources. So, as I say, end of October, I think the budget is it'll be very interesting to see what comes from that.
Thank you, Maureen. The GB Energy also came up in Sir Keir Starmer's speech. In his conference speech yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer announced that GB Energy would have its headquarters in Aberdeen. There's not much detail of the scope of the operation of GB Energy yet, and no detail was given about the number of staff who will be employed in Aberdeen. What has been confirmed is that GB Energy will not generate electricity, and it will not be selling energy to businesses or consumers. It's been described as an investment vehicle to direct government and private. It's been described as an investment vehicle to direct government and private money into renewable energy projects. During the election campaign, Labour had suggested that GB Energy would bring down household energy bills by as much as £300. However, the SNP said that this was just more empty election promises from Labour. Maureen, when he was speaking to conference, Starmer said, "We said GB Energy, our publicly owned national champion, the vehicle that will drive forward our mission on clean energy." He said, "We said it belonged in Scotland, and it does." Do you think he was telling the truth when he said that, or was it accurate for him to say that?
Well, I think the jury's out on that. We will wait and see. I mean, we have, if you think about other government departments where successive Westminster governments have said that they will move civil service jobs, or headquarters will be outside London, it's usually fallen apart, and it's because senior civil servants won't move out of London. So they may say that the headquarters will be in Aberdeen, but it'll be interesting to see how many of the senior jobs are actually in Aberdeen, or whether it will just be a Shell nameplate, or how many people will actually be employed in Aberdeen. I think we've got to wait and see. I mean, if it hadn't been said that the headquarters wouldn't be in Aberdeen, I think there would have been a complete and utter outcry about it, because clearly, if Aberdeen is to remain the all-energy capital of Europe, it really had to be in Aberdeen. But it'll be interesting to see just what difference it will make to Aberdeen and energy jobs in Aberdeen, and how quickly that difference will be made.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. You're kind of echoing what another thing that Stephen Flynn said. He said, good, of course. Now just tell us what it will actually do and when it will bring down energy bills as promised." Another item that came up in the Labour conference, was Sir Keir, that sick people should get back to work. So Sir Keir Starmer has said that people who have been on long-term sickness leave and claiming benefits will need to get back into the workplace. He said he wants more schemes across the country that support people back into work from long-term sickness, because he believes in the basic proposition that you should look for work. During a speech to conference yesterday, Starmer told Labour, if we want to maintain support for the welfare state, then we will legislate to stop benefit fraud, do everything we can to tackle worklessness, and there are about 3 million people in the UK that are not working because of long-term sickness. In an interview on the BBC, Sir Keir Starmer said that the reason he had accepted the equivalent of £20,000 in donations for accommodation was because his son needed somewhere to revise for his GCSEs while his family home was surrounded with journalists during the election campaign. Starmer said the transition to Downing Street had been really difficult for his two children who had grown up in North London. Starmer then defended his decision to take gifts from Labour peer Lord Ali, despite criticism of the arrangement. He said he was not going to apologise for not doing anything wrong. Before saying that ministers would no longer take donations for clothing now they were in government. He did leave the door open to receiving more access to events, such as the £4,000 worth a ticket to a Taylor Swift concert. Maureen, when I heard this was on the agenda tonight, or on the running order, that Sir Keir Starmer had said in public, while there were TV cameras trained on him, that he wanted long-term sick people to go back to work. I thought it was incredulous. I couldn't believe it. So I was going to ask you, can you explain Labour's behaviour since they were elected? And I'm also including Anis Sarwar in that.
Well, I mean, there are an awful lot of people long-term sick, or people who since COVID have not returned to work. And I think the long-term effects of COVID have been really underestimated by governments, and it's really difficult to know how many people will recover or can recover from the long-term effects from COVID. But from my own experience, there are people who want to get back to work, but it's really difficult for them to do so. There are also far too many firms, and an occupational health doctor confirmed this to me, who want to get rid of over 55s and just don't want them in their workforce anymore. And yet the previous government and this government want over 55s to get into work. There are also people who can access private pensions earlier than the state retirement age. So there's a whole lot of factors to be considered. There's also, there are organisations, normally third sector organisations, who put a lot of work into getting people who are furthest from the labour market into work, but there are not the equivalent amount of firms and companies and organisations who are willing to go that extra step to give the help that people further from the labour market need to get back into the workplace and get up to speed like other employees. So there are a huge number of factors involved in this, and it's not an easy thing to say, get everybody back into work. It's just not that simple.
So do you think, is it a question of tone then? The fact that my question to you kind of sounded like I was comparing them to the Tories, or just like the Tories, it doesn't matter how ill you are or how long you've been you've been ill, you just get, you're a lazy benefit scrounger. So when he talked about worklessness and you should just try. So is it the tone that he's gotten wrong then, and I've picked up and missed out on the subtlety that you've given in your answer?
I think we underestimate the number of people who really do want to work. Dignity and respect, self-respect and self-confidence that work gives to people. I think more people than maybe some people recognise do want to work. But, if you are debilitated by an illness, it's not possible to go back immediately to work a 35-hour week, 5 days a week. So there needs to be flexibility in how people return to work. And it's that extra help that people need, either from work coaches at DWP or as I said, the people who need that extra assistance in the workplace. You know, I'm working with somebody who's got dyslexia and mild learning difficulties to try and get him back into work. It's really difficult and it takes a lot of time and effort, as I say, from a work coach or somebody who's experienced in this to help people back into work. So there needs to be a huge amount of different attitudes change among so many organizations to facilitate that. But to me, because work, as I say, gives people the dignity and self-respect that they should be afforded and not labelled as scroungers, because that is really demeaning. And at the same time, recognising that there are people who are just and never will be able to work in the way that most people would define work.
Thank you, Maureen. Forgive me stumbling over at the start of the next item. Sir Keir Starmer is in the US for his third trip in 3 months. He's said to be hoping for meetings with presidential candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Starmer has been able to meet with either presidential candidates on previous trips. Forgive me, I'm going to read that. Starmer has been able to meet with either presidential candidates on Forgive me, so Starmer has not been able to meet with either presidential candidates on previous trips because of their campaigning schedules. Number 10 were unable to confirm whether any meetings had been arranged. Starmer left for New York after his speech at the Labour conference yesterday, ahead of the United Nations General Assembly, where the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be pushing for a deal on the use of Storm Shadow missiles against Russia. President Zelensky is expected to meet both Harris and Trump during his visit to the US as part of Ukrainian efforts to present a victory plan that maps out a path to defeating Vladimir Putin. The Prime Minister will give a speech to the UN summit on Thursday, arguing that taking an international lead on war, climate change and poverty will stop issues rebounding onto the UK, such as immigration flows on an unprecedented scale. In his speech to the UN General Assembly on Thursday, he will set out his international priorities of helping to solve global problems such as war, poverty and the climate crisis, arguing this will help build a safer and more prosperous UK. Starmer's trip is taking place as negotiations continue with the White House to allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons on Russian territory. President Zelensky is expected to meet President Biden as well as the presidential candidates as he pushes for Storm Shadow missiles to be permitted, having said that this autumn will determine the future of this war. Kamala Harris is expected to meet Zelensky on Thursday in Washington. Trump will be at a rally in North Carolina the previous day and has said he will probably meet Zelensky during the trip, despite his criticism of US financial support for Ukraine. Maureen, this piece was basically about the UN General Assembly, which is taking place in New York. 6 days of speeches. There's going to be 87 heads of state, 3 vice presidents, 2 crown princes, 45 heads of government, 8 deputy heads of government, 45 ministers. They're all going to address the Assembly. And of course, this is all taking place in the shadow of war and turmoil in Europe and in Africa and the Middle East. Apparently, this year's theme is Leaving No One Behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development and human dignity for present and future generations. I don't know, Starmer, and where do you think he comes into all of this?
So I think it's quite difficult because the United States is in the grip of election fever. And if I was Harris or Trump, I would probably not want to have to interrupt my election schedule to meet with heads of state. Rather wait and see um, uh, whether that happens the other side of the election. But then, of course, protocol says that UK prime ministers normally would meet the candidates just the same as if a US president came to this country during an election phase. So there is protocol in these types of things. In terms of the UN, the way you read out all these names and things and 87 people there, yes, they're heads of state, and yes, there's obviously going to be a lot of talking and a lot of speechifying. But at these gatherings, there's an awful lot happens on the sidelines and on the fringes, isn't it? And I think that's where a lot of decisions might be made. And I think, for those kind of reasons, it's important that these events take place. And clearly, Zelensky will use the opportunity of meeting as many countries as possible to urge them to help him in Ukraine and to beat Russia. And I think, hearing from him firsthand is really important. But, if you were a cynic, then you would say this is a jolly for people. And obviously, Starmer will want to impress as many people as possible as the new leader of the UK.
Thank you, Maureen. President Biden has lauded the US's progress in fighting the climate crisis during his presidency, while also criticising Donald Trump for his dismissal of the more dangerous world that global heating poses to future generations. The US president was speaking at a Bloomberg event on Tuesday evening, being held as part of Climate Week in New York, a summit that runs alongside the United Nations General Assembly, which the US president spoke at earlier in the day. Climate Week has already featured stark warnings that the phasing out of fossil fuels is moving too slowly. On Tuesday, the UN's top climate diplomat called for the proliferation of renewable energy to spread from wealthy to poorer countries more urgently. Biden said that virtually nothing had been done about climate change when he came into office, but that his policies changed the mindset about the issue by reframing it as an opportunity to build new jobs in clean energy. He said, "We passed the most significant climate law in the history of the world, the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. They told me it couldn't be done, but we did it. Not a single Republican voted for it. More than 330,000 jobs and tens of billions of dollars in investment in electric vehicle, battery and renewable energy manufacturing have spread across America since the bill. This progress is in stark contrast to my predecessor," Biden said of Trump. He says he'd repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, he'd let our factories shut down, he'd move the world backwards. His denial of climate change condemns future generations to a more dangerous world. Biden said the US was now in prime position to lead the world in dealing with the climate crisis. Maureen, I've got a little bit more about Trump. So Biden, as it said in the piece, didn't refer to Trump by his name. They called him his predecessor. Trump has promised to dismantle Biden's climate policies and promote more development of fossil fuels. Trump said that his administration would drill, baby, drill, and develop the liquid gold that is right under our feet. And he suggested that wind turbines harm whales as in the sea mammals rather than the country. I'm guessing, which side do you think is on the side of right or truth? Or
well, I think we've always known that Trump is a climate change denier, and when he was in office, he opened up old coal mines and that sort of thing in some of the states. I did read somewhere, though, that, first of all, Biden's Inflation Reduction Act really was a game changer, and has been very innovative. And we shouldn't forget that he has he has done a lot in this area. And actually, I was reading that many of the swing states have had a lot of the investment in, as you said, batteries and other renewable energies. So it will be interesting to see what sort of impact that has had when it comes to people's voting intentions. But it would be an absolute catastrophe if Trump in and started dismantling a lot of the work that has been done as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Thank you, Maureen. I've just been handed a press release, I think, about regulations laid to help enable winter fuel heating payments to go to eligible pensioners. Regulations laid today, this is all Scottish Government, regulations laid today in Parliament will help ensure pensioners on qualifying benefits receive support with their fuel bills in winter. Social Justice Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville said the UK Government's decision to restrict eligibility for winter fuel payments was taken without consultation or discussion with the Scottish Government, and it is said devastating consequences for our planned launch of pension age winter heating payment, reducing the fund available for our devolved payment by around £150 million. Maureen, is this something that you've been hearing about or talking about with your colleagues in the SNP? It's hot off the
No,
press.
I have to say I've not seen anything about that at all. And as you said, Brian, nothing. There was no consultation with the Scottish Government or, I understand, the other devolved nations before the announcement was made on winter fuel payments. And of course, because money is so tight, the Scotland had to roll back on their intentions for winter fuel payments which was going to be devolved. So I think any move to help pensioners in dire need is really welcome. I'd be interested to see what the details of the scheme are. But, yet again, this is the Scottish Government having to mitigate the disastrous decisions of Westminster governments. And I really hope that those who qualify for pension credit but haven't claimed it so far really do claim it, because there's some talk that if even half of those who are eligible for pension credit but don't currently claim it do then claim what they're entitled to, it would cost the government more than the cost of the winter fuel payments. So I think the government, Westminster government, are getting themselves in a real mess over this and haven't really thought it through. I don't understand why the announcement was made so soon as after they came into office. It's not as if a few months, I already have said publicly that, on one of these programs, that it was ridiculous that it's being introduced for this coming winter when people haven't had the whole of the summer and, back to work out and save for increased bills in the winter. Now not getting the winter fuel allowance, it shows a government that really hasn't got an idea of how people scrimp and save on basic pensions. So it's really a crazy, ill thought out policy that's given them lots of grief, as we've seen at the Labour conference today, and will continue to cause them grief, I think.
Thank you, Maureen. Communities and businesses across Scotland will be given support and tools to help tackle the unavoidable impacts of climate change as part of the Scottish Government's new National Adaptation Plan. The Scottish National Adaptation Plan 2024 to 29, otherwise known as SNAP 3, sets out a comprehensive suite of more than 200 actions and proposals for managing the current and future impacts of climate change in Scotland. Climate change means Scotland will experience more extreme weather. Flooding, water scarcity, and hot weather can damage our environment, disrupt public transport, and affect our supply of foods, vital goods, and services. This means that households, communities, businesses, and organisations across Scotland are having to consider the impacts of climate change more than ever. It includes how sectors including agriculture, transport, and health, as well as businesses and communities, will prepare for more extreme weather events such as flooding, water scarcity, and extreme periods of heat. These include £5.5 million of funding this year to complete a national network of community climate action hubs to drive locally led climate action across Scotland. Investing £400 million into Scotland's railway infrastructure to reduce weather-related disruption. Facilitating peer-to-peer support to local governments and public services to prepare for the impacts of climate change for local populations. To provide advice and support to businesses on how they can future-proof their workplaces through practical checklists on how to prepare for the impacts of climate change. And to ensure that NHS Scotland estate is prepared and equipped to deal with extreme heat and flooding. Launching the plan at a visit to the Restoring the River Leven project, First Minister John Swinney said, "While we must ensure Scotland continues to play its part in addressing the causes of climate change, we must also be ready to deal with the impacts that are already locked in, giving us wetter winters, drier summers, and more weather-related disruption." He went on to say, "Our new adaptation plan is our most comprehensive response to protecting people's lives and livelihoods against the risks of climate change, with over 200 actions to build climate resilience in our communities, businesses, public services, and natural environment." Excuse me. Maureen, this all sounds good and necessary, but I don't know if you're like me. It mentioned the River Leven there. When I go down the Clyde, and past places like Dumbarton, and I've heard predictions that rising sea levels mean that Dumbarton's at risk and could be underwater. And then you go past Helensburgh and Greenock and Gourock, and you kind of think, how are we ever going to be able to do enough to build sea defences, for example, all along the length of the Clyde? And that's only one river.
Yep. They say that sea levels are going to rise, and that some places are at risk. It's not just in this country, but to a greater extent, I think, in other countries. We have got to remember that we are extremely fortunate that we live in a temperate climate compared to the excesses of climate and weather changes that we've seen in other countries. But nevertheless, we have got to take these measures. And I think, from what you read out, Brian, that much of it is common sense. I mean, we see the impact, for example, let's take railways, how adverse weather can really disrupt rail travel. And similarly, it's really important in our agriculture industry that we start growing crops that are more resilient to these weather changes. And, we live in a country that can be quite wet, and the idea that we've got water scarcity is really quite frightening. We've got some of the biggest carbon sinks in the world in our peatlands, but if they dry out, then they're not doing their job. So it'll be really quite exciting to see how this money is used to mitigate some of the worst effects of climate change.
Thank you, Maureen. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes will collaborate with financial institutions to ensure Scotland becomes a global centre for green and sustainable finance and investment. A new report from the Scottish Task Force for Green and Sustainable Financial Services makes 31 recommendations on how the public and private sectors can encourage and fund green investments and tackle the climate emergency. It stresses the Scottish finance industry is particularly well placed to reap profound benefits from becoming a global hub and identifies 4 areas for action. That's policy, promotion, investment and skills. Suggested initiatives include work to ensure Edinburgh and Glasgow sustain and improve their rankings in the Global Green Finance Index, to have new initiatives to attract more financial institutions to build their sustainable businesses in Scotland, collaborate across sectors and academia to improve the skills of Scotland's workforce in sustainable finance. And Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes, who addressed the Ethical Finance Global Summit in Edinburgh today, welcomed the findings. Ms Forbes said, "This report is a decisive action plan as we progress towards making Scotland the natural home for green and sustainable finance. The financial services sector is key to delivering the benefits of the transition to net zero, and we will use this route map to work together and ensure that Scotland, one of the world's oldest financial centres, is able to maximise the opportunities ahead of us." Went on to say, "This report complementing our green industrial strategy and the action we are taking, such as developing a series of investment opportunities and launching an online investment portal in 2025, will make Scotland more attractive for investment." Maureen, this almost seemed to hark back to that piece about President Biden and comparing Trump's climate denials with the 2022 bill that Biden described as reopening shuttered factories and creating more than 300,000 jobs. I wonder, could this be the Scottish equivalent?
Possibly. I think what Kate Forbes announced today in the conference that she addressed is different insofar as we're talking here about the financial investment that's needed to kickstart some of these industries. And I think we underestimate how far the financial industry has changed its mindset. You know, you kind of think of them as traditional old fuddy-duddies, but actually there are a huge number of people in the financial industry who see the need for investment in climate-related industries and climate change industries. And, you know, we should never forget that Scotland punches well above its weight in terms of the financial industries, both traditionally in Edinburgh, but also in Glasgow. And I think the fact that the government is prepared to work with financial industries to promote this and to accelerate it is something to be welcomed.
Thank you, Maureen. Legislative proposals to help reduce the number of domestic homicides and suicides in Scotland have been published in Parliament. If passed by MSPs, the Criminal Justice Modernisation and Abusive Domestic Behaviour Reviews Scotland Bill would require a robust new review process to take place following the death of a partner, ex-partner or child where abuse is known or suspected. The reviews will ensure justice, health, social care, local government and third sector agencies identify and agree any areas for change and improvement so that further deaths may be prevented. Those with direct experience of domestic abuse and families who have been bereaved because of such abuse overwhelmingly backed the plans for this national multi-agency review model during a public consultation. As the bill was published, an information board at a previously unmarked memorial cairn in Holyrood Park was installed by Historic Environment Scotland. The cairn, built in memorial to domestic homicide victim Margaret Hall, who was murdered by her husband in 1720, was visited by Justice Secretary Angela Constance and partners involved in developing the review model. Elsewhere, the new bill proposes measures to modernise the justice sector through greater use of digital technology, including evidence sharing and efficient processes. Excuse me. The reforms include allowing more virtual attendances at criminal courts, electronic signing and sending of documents in criminal cases, and increasing the maximum level of fiscal fines that can be imposed. Justice Secretary Angela Constance said, "One death involving domestic abuse is one too many. While overall homicide rates are falling, there remains a significant number of victims who are killed by a partner or ex-partner, with the vast majority being women." She went on to say that our plans for a new review process will ensure agencies across justice, health, social care, local government and third sector are working together to identify what lessons can be learned following known or suspected domestic abuse deaths. "I hope that identifying what needs to improve will mean there are fewer deaths of this kind." He continued, "This is a dual purpose bill, and some of the criminal justice measures included are already delivering better outcomes and experiences for those using justice services, so it is right that we look to make them permanent." The bill, which is backed by justice partners including the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, also supports greater use of digital technology, which will modernise the justice system even further. So, Maureen, it seemed from what Angela Constance was saying there that the Scottish this is going to take a more holistic approach. But I was struck by the reference to Margaret Hall, murdered by her husband in 1720. Um, that was 304 years ago, forgive me. And you'd like to think that by that time now in 2024 that domestic abuse would be a thing of the past, that you'd only hear about in the history books, and yet um, that it isn't the case. And why do you think that is?
I know it's really unbelievable that there are so many domestic abuse cases still on the go, and that children are not brought up to respect their parents, both partners and their siblings. It's just unbelievable that so much, usually misogyny exists in our society. And, people are still not aware that most homicides are committed by a partner or a close relative, and that domestic violence is a real scourge on society. And we talk very little about suicides that are a result of domestic abuse. And that's something that really, suicide from domestic abuse wasn't something that I had thought about much before. So I think raising the profile of this is really important, and I think re-education has got to start within the family. But that in itself is difficult if generationally one partner has felt that they have to dominate the other, and that's kind of learned behaviour from a very early age. So it's kind of difficult to change that.
Thank you, Maureen. And what about the actual proposals, the Scottish Government proposals themselves? I mean, do you know anything more about what's actually being proposed in it, and I don't know how's that going to help in the long run?
I don't know much about it. This is the first I've heard about it, so I don't know anything much about it. But I'm sure as the bill progresses, we'll hear a lot more about it. And I hope it has all party support, because I think if the proposals are as you laid out here, Brian, that it's important, it's something that everybody should back. I mean, the Scottish Government has done a huge amount in terms of in this area already, in terms of domestic abuse and helping domestic abuse survivors. But there's always more that can be done, as long as it is something that's so prevalent, unfortunately, in our society.
Thank you, Maureen. The Scottish Government has announced that the 31-day cancer treatment standard was met in the quarter, April to June 2024, with 95.5% of patients across Scotland starting their first treatment within 31 days of the decision to treat. A total of 13 out of the 15 boards who record data achieved the standard. Performance against the 62-day target for those urgently referred with a suspicion of cancer was 73.2%. The NHS in Scotland is now treating more patients with cancer on time within both standards compared to 10 years ago, 18.6 more within the 31-day standard and 9.6 more within the 62-day standard. Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, Neil Gray, said, "It is positive that we have met the 31-day standard, ensuring that patients receive prompt treatment when they need it most. This is a testament to the hard work of our NHS staff, who continue to deliver high-quality care under increasing pressure." He continued, "To help reduce cancer waits, the Scottish Government has made £11.3 million of cancer waiting times funding available for 2024-25. with a particular focus on improving performance in urology, colorectal and breast cancer services. Additionally, £30 million has been allocated to reduce national backlogs and waiting lists, with over £1.2 million directed towards diagnostics and treatment for patients referred with an urgent suspicion of cancer. He carried on by saying, "We are treating more patients with cancer on time within both standards compared to 10 years ago." Maureen, when I read this item, I thought, I'm sure that Professor John Robertson of Talking Up Scotland too will have said something about this, and he has. He asks, what's the situation in other parts of the UK? And he said that the ONS has tried to conceal the percentage figures, so you have to download the data, which only has percentage not seen within the target. So he had to do a bit of a quick sum. And basically, in England, 66.6% were seen within 62 days. In Wales, 55.3% were seen within 62 days, and there hadn't been any data collected for 31 days. In Northern Ireland, 34% were seen within 62 days, whereas in Scotland, it's 95.5%. And we often hear cancer waiting times being brought up in political debates. So that. Okay, so apparently I'm doing the Professor Robertson just misjustice when I talk about the 95.5%. We're running out of time, so I'll just recommend to viewers that they check it out and see from this. Maureen, what would you like to say?
Well, just very briefly, I think this was a press release that came out from the Scottish Government yesterday, and I haven't seen any reporting of it in the mainstream media. I mean, this is a good news story. It is a result of really hard work by all those in the health service involved. There's still a bit to go. Well, this needs to be sustained improvement, and it has been at a cost of 11.3 million, as you say, in investment, and there's still work to do on the 62-day standard, but it's another indicator of how the health service in Scotland is performing much better than other parts of the UK. And we still have to remember that detecting cancer early is the most important way to avoid having to get cancer treatment, and our Detect Cancer Early services and provisions like colorectal screening and breast screening is still something that more people to avail themselves of.
Thank you, Maureen. I think that's we're out of time. We did have one more story, which was meant to be a good news story, about the Scottish Government announces a new undergraduate course for optometrists. But I think we'd better let you get on with what's left of the evening. So thank you, Maureen, very much for giving up to. Oh, I've been told to carry on. Are you able to stay with us, Maureen, if I do that?
Yep.
You sure? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so A new, it really is quite lengthy. Going back to a new master's undergraduate degree has been launched to increase the skills, knowledge and experience that optometry students will have when they graduate. The course at Glasgow Caledonian University, which has just accepted its first cohort of students, is the first in the UK to offer an integrated optometry with independent prescribing qualification. Among other things, graduates will be able to prescribe medications for eye conditions previously referred to the GP or hospital ophthalmologists. This will support more patients to be managed in the community closer to home without further referral, helping to get patients treated quicker and ease pressures on NHS waiting lists. So, Maureen, this does sound like a good news story, doesn't it?
Yeah, Minister for Health, I remember helping the optometry industry with making sure that each optometrist place had what was called pacometers or pacometers. The optometrists can do so much to help people's eye health, and not just eye health, but they can find, for example, brain cancer when they're doing the examinations. Anything that can help keep people out of hospital and, as I was talking about earlier, detect things earlier is a really good investment.
Thank you, Maureen. And so that is now the end of what has turned out to be a bumper edition of Scotland at 7. Before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but we receive donations of around £2,500. We urgently need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We're at crisis point and really need to increase our donations to be able to pay our bills and to survive. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you again to my guest, Maureen Watt, and to you at home for watching. Good night.